Few people have had a better perch from which to understand the workings of the world economy than Mark Carney. He spent 5.5 years as governor of the Bank of Canada, only to leave that post and take up an even bigger one as head of the Bank of England. Now, back on this side of the pond, he's taken on two new roles: as United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, and as an author. His book is just out. It's called Values: Building a Better World for All. And it brings Mark Carney to our virtual studio from the nation's capital. And we are delighted to welcome you back to Upper Canada and to our program. How you doing?
I'm very well, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. I'm going to start by reading what I think is sort of the heart of the argument you make in the book. We'll read an excerpt here and then we'll come back and have a chat. For over 12 years, you write, I had the privilege and challenge of being a G7 governor, first in Canada and latterly in the UK. During this time, I saw kingdoms of gold rise and fall. I led global reforms to fix the fault lines that caused the financial crisis, worked to heal the malignant culture at the heart of financial capitalism, and began to address both the fundamental challenges of the fourth industrial revolution and the existential risks from climate change. I felt the collapse in public trust in elites, globalization, and technology, and I became convinced that these challenges reflect a common crisis in values and that radical changes are required to build an economy that works for all. Okay, let's get into this. The core values that we need to incorporate back into our economies are what?
Okay, well, again, thank you for that and for having me on. I think we saw, and in the run-up to becoming governor of the Bank of Canada, of course, we had the start of the financial crisis. It really broke once I became governor, not because I became governor, but once I became governor. And that is a period where we had put excess faith globally, particularly in markets and values of dynamism and efficiency, which are important, but in isolation, ultimately sow the seeds of their own destruction. What we have undervalued, and we see it in the COVID situation, what we've undervalued are values like resilience, sustainability. We see that in the climate crisis, solidarity, by which I mean solidarity with our fellow citizens, lifting all up, fairness, responsibility, and the challenge, and humility, quite frankly, as well. Recognizing the limits of our knowledge, recognizing that things can go wrong, planning for failure, and recognizing that with success comes responsibility. So the book charts the course of how, when we get this wrong, how we sow the seeds of these crises and looks at the various ones, then tries to tease out from the response to the various crises of credit, of COVID, of climate, how through the response that we're trying to re-equilibrate these values, and then not to generalize, but to bring the lessons more broadly for companies, for leaders, for countries, in terms of what should we do? How do we actually put this into action?
How much luck do you think you had trying to get those two rather august institutions to think a little more broadly about what the nature of capitalism ought to be?
Well, the first thing is to recognize I had a lot of luck to lead those two august institutions, and with that, I think did come some responsibility. In terms of the Bank of Canada, I think the nature of the institution, I think there is that balance in that institution, a recognition within its responsibilities that it has these it plays a role in these broader responsibilities, whether it's around financial inclusion, whether in terms of our response to the crisis was to draw on the resources of the Canadian financial system and encourage the Canadian financial system and the banks at the core to contribute to the solution, and to their credit they did, and that's one of several reasons why Canada fared much better. It's a sort of untold story until it's told in the book. Now, with respect to the Bank of England, I mean, candidly, I was brought there because of failures of that institution, failure of the system in the UK. And when I mean system, I mean the broader system in terms of undervaluing resilience, not having fairness and responsibility in that system. And it required, in order to address it, a series of reforms to the institution itself, that august institution itself, which wasn't a very diverse institution, wasn't a very, didn't have inclusive decision-making processes, didn't have the outreach across the country, so didn't have the perspective that's necessary to truly live values. I mean, one of the points in the book is, you see most clearly economic impacts if you see from the periphery, if you see from the perspective of those who are unemployed or underemployed or worried about their futures. That's a far better vantage point than, the corner of King and Bay. And in order to do that, you've got to get out and about and talk and engage and employ people from those perspectives. And that's much of what had to happen at the Bank of England.
I was telling you before we went on the air that you have written a very serious book, and I learned a hell of a lot reading the book. I kind of joked as a bit too much Karl Marx and not enough Groucho Marx, but we will get into some. Well, you know what? Just for the heck of it, let's do a bit of Groucho Marx right here, because you do tell a cute story about meeting George Osborne, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, the equivalent of the finance minister over here, who, upon meeting you, wanted to borrow a painting of yours. What's that story?
Well, literally on the first day, there's a portrait, as there often is in these institutions, of each of the governors, or a portrait of a bust, except for one governor, a guy named Montague Norman, who was the governor in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and there were 13 of him. And he wasn't, in the end, that successful of a governor. So I took one down that was in my office. I thought, 12 was probably enough. And within, 5 minutes, Osborne calls up, which told me something about the flow of information. And he asked to borrow it. And the reason he wanted it was to hang it in the dining room of number 11 Downing Street. Now, as you know, number 11 Downing Street is where the Chancellor lives, right next to number 10, where the Prime Minister lives. And there's a great dining room there. And that was the room in the 1920s, the mid-1920s, where Montague Norman, this former governor, convinced Winston Churchill, when he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, to put the UK back onto the gold standard at the parity before the pre-war, so the pre-war level before World War I. Now, enormous amount had changed, and they put the UK back at this very overvalued exchange rate, in effect, and caused this massive recession. As a consequence, Churchill lost his job and spent more than a decade in the wilderness. And Osborne has this portrait up because he wanted to remind himself never to listen to the advice of the governor of the Bank of England. So, and I have to say, he didn't. He didn't. And look where he is now.
And did Osborne listen to your advice after that?
He listened. He did listen from time to time, but he didn't always listen to it.
Not always. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get back to a little more of Karl and a little less of Groucho. We do want to talk about some of the main themes that are facing us now in the 21st century: credit, COVID, and climate change. And I guess I want to start with this. In the midst of a massive economic upheaval of the past year, the markets are doing just fine, thank you. How can that be?
Yeah, well, the markets are looking forward, as they always do, and they're judging that this is a, quote, temporary upheaval, and that actually the dislocation that comes from it, and that's a fancy word for, how many people are ultimately going to lose their jobs, how many companies will ultimately go bankrupt. The markets are judging that that will be limited, and actually the economy will grow more, will grow again. Let's put it that way, will grow again. Very importantly, though, what the markets are also judging is that interest rates will be very low for a very long period of time. Now, those two don't necessarily go together. I mean, the more the economy grows, which is a good thing, we ultimately want the economy to grow. That's how Canadians get ahead as individuals, and I mean all Canadians, not just some Canadians. If the economy is growing, over time, interest rates are going to rise, and there will be some adjustment that comes from those markets. But it's a product of extraordinary circumstances. What really matters is not the level of the markets, it's the jobs that are created, and the sustainable jobs that will not just be around for a few months, but for decades, and jobs that will lead to careers for our children. That's what matters coming out of this. And you asked about the Montague Norman story, which is, it's a cute story, but there's a point to that, which is what Norman forgot, or what he didn't realize, is the world had changed with the great upheaval of the First World War. And the UK was not the same, and new industries were rising, and that they needed to make fundamental changes in order to take advantage of that. And his reaction was to go back to the glories of the past, which made things worse. So our challenge is to assess what's changing, how can we take advantage of that as Canada, and there's a huge range of opportunities there, so that it's not a question of the markets being up, but it's people's livelihoods being up, and very importantly, the livelihoods of their children.
As we consider how our political leaders have responded to the huge challenge that COVID-19 has presented, you do say, I think, some very interesting things about how we ought to judge political leadership, either in the province, the country, the world, whatever. And you say leaders need to be guided by expertise rather than outsource decisions to expert. I hear Premier Doug Ford and listen, I'm not trying to get you in any trouble with anybody here. I'm really not. But you say this in the book, and this is the first thing that went through my head. Doug Ford, every day he comes to the microphone, says, I have to take the advice of the medical officer of health of the province of Ontario. I would never go against his advice. Now, by your definition, that's not wise leadership, right?
Well, it's ultimately leaders have to make decisions, and so the Premier, in your example, or the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, when they are guided by advice, ultimately they are taking responsibility for implementing that advice. That's the first point. The second is that we are in a situation where a number of jurisdictions thought, around the world, thought that there was a trade-off between health and economics, the economy versus health, and let's try to find the sweet spot. I think the point made in the book and the experience that we've lived through is, in this case, there's not. The primary objective, as has been the objective in Ontario and more broadly across Canada, has been people's health. Because ultimately, if we take off from lockdowns or other preventative measures too quickly, then we end up having a bigger surge and we have to lock down more. Plus, we've had the tragedies of the health outcomes. Now, that said, within the broader objectives of containing COVID, there is questions about what's the most effective way to do it, and what are the costs of those, including to broader health, mental health, mental health including domestic violence, health of children who are not being adequately educated in many circumstances, and in some circumstances, inequalities that exist in our society are exacerbated in these, and is that truly being taken into account in all these judgments, which have a primary weight on COVID, and other aspects of health which may not be weighted as much. I mean, and of course the experts will make those. But I don't think, as a leader, to get back to the core point, as a leader in these circumstances, as a leader in a financial crisis, as a leader in any circumstance, you take advice, but you make the decision. You own the decision. And one of the things that is exceptionally difficult in this situation, although it's, we had similar things in the financial crisis, is new information will come into play. We will learn. Sometimes we'll make mistakes, and it's very, very important to admit that, and admit those mistakes or those learnings and move on. And that's how you maintain trusted people. Last point, which is it shouldn't be underestimated. One of the things about leadership is competence and quality of execution. And that's a judgment that Canadians will make in terms of rollout of test and trace programs or not, rollout of vaccination. There's no style points on vaccination. People are vaccinated or they're not, and that's the judgment here in all levels of government. Working as effectively as possible to get us in a position where we move out of these extreme measures and necessary measures, to be absolutely clear. I think necessary measures that we're all living through. Necessary
measures, to be sure, but at some point, decisions are going to have to be made about what comes next. And I note that year over year, the government of Canada is probably spending, getting close to $400 billion more this year than they did last year or pre-pandemic. Government of Ontario is approaching $30 billion more year over year spending. This obviously can't continue in perpetuity. So what What kinds of decisions are we going to have to make going forward to figure all that out?
Well, first, we're going to have to start to get out of this, which is determined by the health outcomes, as you well know. But as we start to move out of this, then the challenge is going to be our objective should be moving from support to regeneration of the economy, making sure that, look, I mean, the reality is here in Canada, Ontario and Canada, for the first probably 2 quarters after the end of lockdown and true emergence from this, the economy is going to grow very rapidly. We'll reopen a bunch of sectors of the economy. A number of people do have pent-up savings and have work, and there will be a sharp pickup in growth. That's the easy bit. That is the easy bit. The question is what's going to be sustained, and that will be driven by new businesses starting up. That will be driven by business investment. That will be driven by people's confidence. And that's determined by not, the relief rally, if you will, in the economy, but confidence of where the direction for the economy. And so for governments as a whole, this shift, part of this spending, the numbers you quoted, of course, is replacing bits of the economy that were shut down. And so some of it corrects because the economy opens up and that spending doesn't have to happen. We don't have to pay the CERB to somebody whose job, thankfully, has restarted and they're going back to work as they want to. But on top of that, we need to be very careful about not layering in a series of additional transfers or so-called current spending when what we need is to support investment in the economy. And there's many ways to do that don't involve spending money, so that we're building the industries and the jobs of today, but the careers of the future. And again, I'm going to over-labor the Montague Norman reference, but some things have changed, and some of the nature of our economy, changes in our economy have accelerated as a consequence of COVID. In general, that's a good thing for Canada, but we have to be conscious of that and not try and go back to status quo ante, back to the old ways, but take advantage of some of these changes in a way that makes all Canadians' lives better.
We've talked credit, we've talked COVID, let's talk climate change. And in particular, because of your role with the United Nations, I really want to get your view on what transpired at the Conservative Party annual general meeting over the weekend, where, despite the admonition of their leader, Erin O'Toole, to get the party to think differently about climate change, 54% of members went on the record to say they don't think climate change is real. How do you react to that?
My first reaction is not to make a direct political comment because I never fully understand the workings of political parties. Look, the issue is real. It's one of the core challenges of our generation, of our age. It is one of the biggest risks to the Canadian economy, and it's arguably the biggest opportunity for the Canadian economy. I mean, after all, as Prime Minister Harper used to say, rightly so, that Canada is an energy superpower. The energies of the future can build on Canadian strengths, including in carbon capture storage, hydrogen, in hydro, direct air capture, and beyond. But we need to consciously pursue those while we manage our existing resources. This is a key element of competitiveness for countries. We've seen Europe's moving to zero-emission vehicles, all vehicles zero-emission by 2030. We are seeing a similar direction coming out of the United States. How well are we going to be integrated to that? We've made some initial steps in that direction, very welcome with the Ford announcements and others. Ford, the company, well, I'm sure Ford, the Premier, will be part of those announcements, I suppose, but so with the double Ford. But we need an integrated strategy for this that is truly building sustainable jobs. And I mean sustainable jobs as part of a sustainable economy, but sustainable jobs because they're jobs of the future, in the auto sector, in the energy sector, in the IT sector, because a lot of the solutions will come out of workings in our machine learning and artificial intelligence sectors, which are burgeoning areas. But these things don't just happen. You need supportive policies with this. You need to understand that the issue is real, and that we can play a leading role in addressing it. And yes, I think we have a responsibility to it, including to younger Canadians, in order to be at the forefront of this. But we also have a compelling economic reason to do it, and to deny that I don't think serves any of those objectives well.
Well, Mr. Carney, we've reached the point in the interview that you know is coming and I know is coming, and you get asked every single time you do an interview.
Yes.
And so let's just do it and get it out of the way, shall we?
Yeah.
You know what I'm going to ask here. Are you a member of a political party in Canada at the moment?
I am not a member.
You are not. Everybody thinks you're a liberal. Are you a big L liberal?
Well, I just disclosed that I'm not a member of a political party. I am someone who's been very fortunate to have a series of roles in public service. I have one at the moment, working for COP26 in the UN, which is occupying a lot of my time. I'm someone who likes to contribute to getting things done, and there's different ways to get things done. One of the ways to try to contribute to that is to lay out and in detail a number of policy priorities that I think Canada should follow, which is part of this book. It's not all of this book, but it's an important part of this book.
You can't do what you have done in your life, and you can't be who you have been in your life, and then put 600 pages of policy on the record and started your own Twitter account, for goodness sakes. I mean, who the heck does that without people thinking this guy's about to launch himself into politics? So maybe we should put the question this way. I think you're going to get in someday. Can you think of any reason why you wouldn't?
Somebody else will do it better. That's a good reason. That is a very, and that's not just an answer. Look, ultimately, politics, government is there for a reason. In Canada, it's to have a better future for Canadians, helps contribute to a better future for Canadians. You need people of all walks of life in politics. There's various ways to contribute to it, and it's look, I've seen it up close. For over a decade, almost 2 decades, and I have enormous respect for those who put themselves out there and do it. And if there's someone who can accomplish these things, then I'll fully support them.
Okay, I'm going to let it go now. Okay, shall we move on?
Yeah, I'm fine with moving. I'm fine with moving on.
It's so much fun playing that game with you anyway. But yeah. Okay, let's try this. You do point out in the book that job one of any government is to protect its citizens. And some governments have done a pretty good job of that, and some governments have done a very lousy job of that over the past year. So there is a crisis of public trust right now. What do you think it will take to rebuild that bridge of trust between governments and their citizens?
Well, it takes time. Anytime you have a failure, it takes time to rebuild trust, and there's many colorful analogies for that. So I'll spare you them. But part of it will take a very deliberate approach to, okay, so what is it required for resilience? And I do use an analogy in the book, which is there's a house just outside of Oxford which has literally a giant great white shark sculpture going through the roof, and the guy put it there right after the Chernobyl disaster. And his point was that these big risks from abroad come and hit you at home out of the blue. Now, we've had a financial crisis that came from abroad. We've had a COVID crisis that coming from abroad. We have a climate crisis, which doesn't entirely come from abroad because we're partly a contributor to it. But we have these things. We have risks every day of a cyber crisis coming from abroad as well. Now, the responsibility of government is to think about those crises and take steps today to help protect the economy, protect Canadians, because it's through no fault of Canadians that they're hit from these. And so they need to be protected. And in order to protect, one of the first things, the point I make is you have to plan for failure. You have to plan that some big American bank is going to fail. You have to plan that a cyber attack is going to be successful. And then what are you going to do to make sure our systems continue to work? You have to plan that there's another virus that comes out of, in some country, so that we have the resources here, the capacity here to address the virus in the future, and on and on and on. and that takes a very clear. Somebody has to be responsible. Organizations have to be responsible. The Bank of Canada on financial stability. Is it Public Health Canada on pandemic preparedness? And if they're not up to it, then who else should it be? But we should all know and hold them to account for it. You need to plan for failure. You need to build buffers, and you need diversity in your system so that you're able to withstand that. And that's how you start to rebuild. Do your job. That's the way ultimately you build back trust, as you fulfill your responsibilities. But that's some of the ways in which you actually do that.
The clock has just flown by, and we're literally down to our last minute here, but it dovetails nicely out of what you just said, which is given the, and I'll use a nice neutral word here, given the uneven response of many governments around the world, do you feel any qualms about urging that the next rebound is going to be much more government-led than maybe some people who deal with the markets every day would appreciate?
Okay, so thank you for saying that. That's not what I'm saying, actually. I think government has an important role in setting the direction for the economy. I don't think that this should be a return to the era of big government. So let's finish on climate, which is, it is as important that the government has set out this path for the carbon price out $170 by 2030 with the rebates for Canadians. That gives a very clear direction for business to invest in lower carbon options. It is important that we know the regulatory framework for, fancy words, but for the financial sector around net zero in this country, because that will help allocate capital. It's important that the government puts money or regulation, including demand around hydrogen economy, around carbon capture and storage, because that reinforces some of the big opportunities and needs, opportunities in Alberta, Saskatchewan, but also needs for addressing climate change. Most of those, what I just went through, those don't cost government money. And what they do is they set the direction for the economy. And then you have the best in the private sector, the young, the innovative, the entrepreneurs, and they start to come up with solutions. And solutions, I've been around government a long time, solutions that government will not imagine. And to bring it back to the book, if I may, because it's kind of a core point, is you have the values of society, sustainability and jobs and resilience, but delivered through the value of the market. And so set the direction for the economy, provide these guideposts through regulation and carbon pricing and others, and then get the private sector as much as possible to drive the solutions, and that's how we'll move forward.
The name of the book is Values: Building a Better World for All. If you don't go into politics, I'll tell you this: you'd make a hell of an economics professor, because I actually understand now. I actually understand what asset-backed commercial paper is now, thanks to this book.
Fantastic.
Miracles abound. Thank you, Mark Carney.
Thank you very much, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.